Hi everyone, I'm Trevor Picard with MSA, and I just wanted to say thanks for attending this online session, and big thanks to Michelle at the OAFC for putting this together and putting it on, and huge thanks to everyone at AJ Stone for all their help in sponsoring this, the logistics, the hosting, the camera work, everything needed to pull this together. So a huge thanks to everybody there. Before we get started, I just think it's important to note that this will just be an overview of some basic key points on firefighter thermal imaging, and in no way should be considered a thorough training session. More complete training session usually I find takes a good half a day, followed by a bunch of sessions of hands-on evolutions. And over the years, I've seen a wide range of fire department thermal imaging training programs, everything from really detailed, thorough, ongoing programs to just a basic, green button turns it on, white's hot, black's cold, away you go type of thing. So anyway, hopefully this session gives all of you at least a few pointers at a minimum to add to your training program, and maybe a taste of what could be covered in a more thorough program as well. Because we have such a wide varied audience here, I've tried to keep things quite generic. I've tried to incorporate a few images from different manufacturers of thermal imagers, as well as NFPA and non-NFPA cameras. But when you're doing your session, obviously I think it's important to make sure that everything that you're working with is specific to your make, brand, model of camera, including all the options, like if you have built-in compass, color palettes, rangefinder, that kind of thing. All those options need to be really carefully trained on to be fully understood. I won't have time to go through any of those kind of options today, but just wanted to make you aware that I think it's important to cover off those points. As far as our agenda today, we're going to go through just a touch on NFPA versus non-NFPA cameras, different types of cameras being small format, medium format, as well as SCBA integrated cameras. There's also some new TIC'S coming out with more functionalities to them as well, so we'll touch on that. And then the bulk of the session will get into just kind of TIC 101, just the basics of thermal imaging, how a TIC works, image interpretation, which is one of the most important points to get across to your folks, some of the limitations of thermal imagers, and then we'll get into some tactical and safety considerations just as far as your common uses of the SCBA and what you're running into day to day. And then as well at the end, we're going to do some live Q&A as well. So it's going to be live at the end, but we encourage you to send in your questions via the chat or comment section on your screen as we go along. So as the questions pop into your head, just throw them out there, and then at the end we'll start reading them off and going through those answers for you. First section is going to be on just the basics of how TICs work. Like I said, I think that's really important in the understanding of the image interpretation, is to understand how that image is generated. So what we're looking at is infrared energy, is what the camera's picking up. All objects give off infrared energy. Objects emit different amounts of IR at different rates depending on their temperature and also depending on their material. So every different material has a different what's called emissivity. And then also a consideration there that kind of throws things off a lot of times is reflectivity. So objects that are reflective, like mirrors, stainless steel, even just glossy paint on an object can really throw off the emissivity of that object. So you may not get an accurate representation of the temperature of that object because of the reflectiveness of it. So there's different types of emitters. There's passive emitters, active emitters, and direct emitters. So a passive emitter, if you look at this picture that I've got up here, a passive emitter would be the car that's not running, the trees, the building, that type of stuff. So it's items that pick up energy from other sources and then give it off, versus active emitters. So in that picture you've got the person standing behind the car, the engine running is an active emitter. So that's something that's creating its own IR energy. And then you've got direct emitters. So direct emitters are things that actually heat up other objects. So you could actually say that the engine is acting as a direct emitter in this scene, because it's giving off enough heat to impose its heat energy on the hood of the car. But typically we're looking at things like the fire, the sun, things like that are giving off vast amounts of energy. And just as a tip, please make sure your people don't point their camera right at the sun. That's way too much energy for most TIC cores to take. And then when we're using the TIC, one of the key things that we're interested in is the ability to see through the smoke. And the way that works is visible light doesn't make it through the smoke very far, because it runs on a really tight wavelength that gets scattered by the smoke. Versus infrared energy has a really long wavelength, so it's not hitting the smoke particles as much, so it's able to travel through that smoke and get to our camera so we can pick it up. So like I mentioned, all objects give off IR energy. How that works in the camera is it picks up that energy and then converts it into a black and white image. So you can think of every pixel, it's just like a digital camera. So every pixel on a digital camera is picking up the different light energy, or the different light and color, and transposing that onto the image. Same thing with this, we're picking up IR instead of visible light and transferring that into an image. And then the color that you see on most cameras is actually just a program. It's just a digital overlay. So at specific temperatures, we're asking the camera to paint those pixels with those specific temperatures to highlight them for you. Something else you need to be made aware of, TICs can show superheated gases, but generally only right at the source. So otherwise, when you're using a thermal imager to take a temperature, for example, of an object like a wall, the thermal imager is only taking the temperature of the actual object, not the air temperature. And that's kind of a misconception sometimes that I've run into, especially we see it with a really hot, aggressive fire, and somebody comes out and says, wow, I saw temperatures of such and such, and they take it as that's how hot the scene was, when really that was just the temperature of the object that you were aiming the TIC at, not necessarily how hot the gases in that room could have been. So they could have been much hotter. So for example, in a typical burn tower, you could be taking the temperature of the concrete wall, and it may only say it's 250 degrees Fahrenheit, but you could have gases that are well over 500 degrees Fahrenheit, running across that wall. It's just the fact that the wall hasn't had a chance to absorb as much heat as what's being impinged on it. You've got in that case, a concrete wall absorbing a lot of that heat. So that's something that you need to really be aware of when you're looking at temperatures of what you're seeing on the temperature readout of the thermal imager. So now let's talk about how objects are heated. We all know there's conductive, convective, and radiant heating. So conductive being something in direct contact with a hotter object, and it's giving off its heat. Convective heating, where the object is being impinged by hotter gas and heating it that way. And then we've got radiant heating, where you've got the heat energy radiating directly onto an object, generally acts in a straight line or can be reflected. And then also of note, time and the different materials will also affect how much an object heats up in a given amount of time. So this is important for the thermal imaging. If you look at the image we have on the screen right now, we've got a little bit of everything happening there. So what we've got is a burn tower with the door open. We've had a good strong fire going in there for a period of time. So on the wall just inside that room, we've got a ton of radiant heat showing there, and then we've got hot gases coming out across the ceiling coming out of that room. So there's our convective heating up that part of the ceiling. And then as well, you can see that orange straight line going across the ceiling as well. So that's actually a pipe, an empty water pipe. And so that's getting a little bit of both as well. So you've got the convective, the convective heating impinging on that pipe. And then also you probably have some conductive heating of that hot pipe close to the fire, that heat traveling up the length of the pipe as well. So I think it's important to realize all this stuff to help with your interpretation of what you're seeing. So why is that pipe that's halfway across the room so much hotter than the rest of the room? That's how it would happen. So yeah, getting into the different ranges of the thermal imager. So unlike industrial TICs, it can be set for a very specific narrow range to get, you know, the absolute best picture for that specific small temperature range. Firefighting TICs have to operate in a huge wide range of temperatures, from, you know, outside in the winter at -40 right up until right up to like 1,000 degrees Fahrenheit in a structure fire. So to do that without being overcome, the old cameras, when TICs were first on the market for thermal imaging, we had a lot of what was called whiteout or red out, where there was just one mode, and when you had too much heat energy being absorbed into the camera, you just got the entire scene was just whited out or red, and you didn't make anything out from it. So to combat that, all modern TICs have a high and low range for the sensitivities and how those work. So the high sensitivity mode, when we're talking about high sense mode or high sensitivity mode, that is the most sensitive the camera can be. So that's for the lower temperatures where you don't have a ton of heat energy. So that's going to give you, it's set to give you your most sensitive image, your highest quality image. But then if you get to the point where there's too much heat energy on the screen being absorbed into the core, it needs to drop down into what we call low sensitivity mode or low sense mode. So it's just taking it down a notch. It's dumbing down the sensitivity of the camera, so you still have a usable, workable image that you can see even though you've got those elevated temperatures. So in this case, if you look at the image on the screen, there's a split screen here. We've got the exact same image, just with the bottom image being still in high sensitivity mode, so you can see the person in the background really well. And it's an outdoor image. The guy's not in an SCBA. It's definitely not inside, but we've got a CCAN cutaway that the fire is in, and then eventually enough energy gets into that image that it makes it drop into the low sensitivity mode. So now you see the upper image, and this is a more drastic version of it. Most cameras don't have this drastic of a difference, but this image gives you a good idea of what we're talking about. So when it drops down into low sensitivity mode, now you're just looking at anything that's colored is really just the seat of the fire. And you can see how it definitely degrades the image quality. You don't see the person in the screen near as well. So that kind of gives you an idea of what we're talking about, the high sensitivity versus low sensitivity image quality. So what it takes to switch those modes, basically it's the percentage of the screen that's reading over a specific temperature. And every thermal imager is slightly different on that, so that's something that you really need to be aware of with your specific camera, is what does it take to make that image drop into low sensitivity mode. So for example, in the image with the burn tower and the fire in the adjacent room, so we've got a little bit of radiant heat showing on that doorway. We're still in high sensitivity mode, but then in the other image, this is an interesting one too. So you've got a case where the camera's dropped into low sensitivity mode, but you've got no colorization. So that, if you run into that, that's where you need to be aware of when your camera's in low sensitivity mode, what tells you that. So the new NFPA cameras actually have an icon that defines that you're in low sensitivity mode. Some of the old ones, like the example in this image, there's a little L at the bottom left corner, so that's telling you you're in low sensitivity, and the color of and the range of the temperature gauge has changed. But either way, the key point here is we don't have any colorization, but it's in low sensitivity mode. So that should be telling me that I've got a lot of heat in that scene, but it's the heat that's there is enough to drop it into low sensitivity mode, but not enough showing that I'm seeing the red color. So in that case, if I walked in the door and turned the corner, you'd probably be seeing the seat of the fire there, and that's where you would get the colorization. Another thing to be aware of, anytime a camera is switching from high sensitivity to low or back, every time it's switching modes, it's going to activate the shutter. We'll talk about that a little bit later, but just to be aware that your camera will shutter, so it will freeze the image for about a half a second as it's doing that. Yeah, and just to give you an example, not all cameras, like I said, use the same percentage, but here's an example of it. So this represents your your entire screen, so your core. And in this case, on this camera, 32% of the pixels need to be colorized or over that specific temperature to make it switch into low sensitivity mode. Some cameras are vastly lower, so you just need to be aware of that as to what makes that camera switch modes. So in this section, we'll talk about some of the limitations of your thermal imaging camera. So I'll just run through a few common ones. Probably the biggest one, the easiest misconception, is that you can see hot objects or see heat through a wall. You're not actually seeing through the wall. All you're looking at is the temperature or the radiant, the infrared heat on the outer surface of the wall. So the way I find the easiest way to think of it is you're taking the temperature of the last layer of paint that was put on that wall. So whatever heat is in behind that wall had to make it all the way through whatever that wall is made of and get to that outer surface. So that's what you're actually looking at when you see an infrared image of heat inside or behind a wall or an object. Some of the other things that come up, you can't see through glass. Doesn't matter, any kind of glass, you can't see through it. It basically acts as a mirror, so you're just going to get a reflection. So if you're standing right in front of it, it's pretty obvious to you because you'll see yourself. But glass is something you really have to be aware of that can throw you off and disorient you. If you're in for example, a retail location with big windows, lots of mirrors, lots of glass displays, it can be literally like a house of mirrors when you're looking at it through the thermal imager, because everything's reflecting off of each other. It can be really confusing. So in those cases, a good tip is to try to orient yourself to the floor. So if you're tilt your camera down so you're seeing some of the floor in your picture, so that's not being reflective, or the ceiling, anything that's above those reflective materials. Same thing kind of with water. So a thermal imager definitely can't see through water. So if you're trying to look over a bridge to see a car underwater or a person or something like that, you're not going to get anything. The water is basically mostly acting like a solid with some reflectivity to it, so you're going to see some shimmering, that type of thing. So that's something to keep in mind. TIC'S don't tend to work very close up. They don't have like an autofocus like your digital camera. They're kind of a set focus. So usually you're looking at about 3 feet to a meter is about the limit to how accurate you're going to get an image when you get close up. So at arm's length, you're not going to be able to make out a door latch or something like that. It might be a little bit fuzzy, so you might have to take a step back. Shuttering is an important thing. We mentioned it when I had that video going and the screen froze. So most cameras, all modern cameras have a warning on the screen that tells you when the image is about to shutter. So that can happen. It happens on a regular interval. So what the camera is shuttering for, we mentioned it definitely does it anytime you're switching from high to low or low to high sensitivity mode. But all cameras have a preset interval that it shutters at as well. It might be 2 minutes, it might be 4 minutes, it might be 5 minutes. So again, something good to know about your specific camera. But either way, just to be aware of it, that the camera is going to shutter. You're usually going to get a few second notice with that icon that's going to come up to telling you that it is. The reason it's important, it's only shuttering for about half a second in most cases. But if you think of when you're panning a room and you're doing a search, it takes less than half a second for me to move my camera from one side of the room to the other like that. So if it shuttered in that time and I didn't notice it, you could potentially miss something. If you're watching the camera, chances are you'll notice that the image is froze. But just to be aware of it, it's important to know. The image you see on the screen now just gives you that's the actual layout for the NFPA icon. So all cameras that are NFPA have the same layout when they're in basic mode. So the ones I wanted to bring to your attention are the shutter and the low sensitivity mode. So number one, the top right corner, the triangle, that's your low sensitivity mode indicator. So that's important to know. Like we said, it really changes the image when you get into low sensitivity mode as far as what's colored and what's not. So that's important to realize. And then the small square below it, that's just going to pop up for a few seconds before your camera shutters, and then it'll be gone. So just to give you an idea of those icons. It may be, if you've got a non-NFPA camera, those icons may be different. So it's just, again, be aware of your specific camera. A couple other limitations to go over. Anywhere you've got a low contrast scene, and that's a lot of cases anytime you're not in a building on fire, basically, in a lot of cases, or not outside. When you're inside, normal ambient temperatures, you can consider it a low contrast scene. So for example, we're in this building, it's air conditioned, everything in here is roughly the same temperature. So all we're working off of when we're looking around this room is the different emissivity that we talked about of the objects. So, a wooden desk versus a metal desk versus a filing cabinet versus the wall. Even though they're all the same temperature, they're giving off slightly different amounts of radiation, so that's how we're able to pick up on it. But again, it can be challenging because just that little bit of difference in emissivity can make for not a very clear scene to pick up on. So I mean, you can again orient yourselves to walls, ceilings. Sometimes that will give you a little more definition of the layout of the room than just the objects in it. Okay, so in this next section, we're going to talk about some of the tips and tactics for the most common uses of your firefighting TIC. So starting with scene size up, I think a lot of this makes sense to people. Taking your TIC on your 360 when you first arrive to size up the overall building, size up possible ventilation points, determine the location, the corner of the building, maybe where the fire seems to be, any extension that's happening. You can use it to keep an eye on exposure. So if you got an exposure close to that building, you can use your TIC to get some temperature readings and see how hot that wall's starting to get. Couple of tips though. Be aware of environmental conditions outside. Main one being just the weather that day. So when you're looking at the outside of a building, it can really be impacted by what's been happening to that building before it caught fire. So was it a sunny day? Is there big trees in the way that have shaded half the building and not the other half? Just being aware of that. So when you're looking at the walls of the building and you see one area that seems hotter than another, is there another reason other than possible heat from inside? Another good tactic to use is instead of you always want to get back and get as much of a wide angle view as you can to get more reference points of your image, and being able to do that from the corner of a building and seeing two sides of the building often can help you out a lot with that as well. And if you're having trouble with what's going on, with the outside of the building, a lot of times you're better off trying to key in on the eaves, on windows. You're often going to see different heat signatures coming through cracks and gaps in the edges of the windows, and that may be an easier way. And especially when you've got a modern, well-insulated building, it's going to take a lot of heat anyway to start showing anything through the actual side of the building. So that's usually what you're looking for. In this next video clip here I've got, kind of gives you an example of what I was talking about as far as the heating from the sun. You can see the shade from the tree impacting. It looks like a shadow because it actually is. It's actually a thermal shadow. That's not light we're seeing. That's just because that area of the house is not as warm as the area beside it that's been hit with the direct sunlight. As far as interior search goes, I think everybody's pretty comfortable with using a thermal imaging camera for interior search. Something to consider though, that maybe some departments haven't, is the different types of searches that can be done with a thermal imager. So the most traditional is a TIC lead search, people call it. So you've got the crew without a TIC staying with and following the TIC operator. So he's the eyes, and everybody else is just kind of fanning out a little bit, but still sticking pretty close. Then you've got really popular for the last while is the TIC guided search. So typically if you've got a crew of 3, you might have the captain positioning himself in the hallway, one crew member in a room to his left, one in a room to his right, so he can keep an eye on it. He's within in talking distance, he's within viewing distance with his thermal imager. The guys are in there searching. A lot of times it's good practice to if you're doing that to give the guy going into that room to do the search, a bit of a peek with the camera so he can get into the doorway with him, so he can see the layout of the room, so he knows what he's going into. He can see that, hey, there's a bed I got to search, there's a closet on the other side of the bed, that type of thing. So he's got a layout before he even goes in there. So that's very typical of a TIC guided search. And then lately what we're starting to run into more and more now, where departments are getting enough TICs to issue for every seat on the truck. For example, with the integrated TICs that are built into the SCBA. So every SCBA has a TIC. So now it's a personal issue TIC search. So every man has his own TIC. Now you can get ultra efficient at your search because every guy can see exactly where he's going. Less chance of getting disoriented or lost and that type of thing. As far as a couple of little tips, like I mentioned before, watching for shapes. So, you know, we've got the image there of a little child hiding behind the other side of the bed type of thing. That's a pretty obvious one. He might be right under the bed, and if you didn't look under it, you might just see a foot sticking out or something like that. So you're not always looking for an actual, you know, obvious body shape. The other one to be aware of, especially when you're thinking of doing a RIT search and you're searching for a fellow firefighter, something I pepper into my training a lot of times is you can ask your guys the question of, okay, you're going in to do a search for a downed firefighter that just called a mayday. What do you expect him to look like when you get to him? Is he going to be light gray, dark gray, black, white? What's he going to look like on your screen? And the answer could be all of the above is the right answer, because it could be any of those. So if you imagine, especially if you take it to the extreme and you go to a full-blown structure fire that the guy's getting into a really hot building, but he's coming from 20 degrees below zero outside on a winter day. So when you look at that guy through the camera when he's standing outside, he's going to be white because he's the hottest thing outside in that 20-degree temperature. Absolutely. As soon as he walks into the hot environment of the room, he's instantly going to be the opposite. He's going to be really dark gray or black, because all that standing out in that 20-degree weather, he's brought all that cold. His gear is cold. He's brought that in with him. So now he's the coldest thing in that room. So now as that firefighter makes his way to the seat of the fire, he's battling the fire for a bit maybe, and then becomes disoriented or incapacitated. He gets away from the fire into the next room, and that's where you find him. Well, he's just been in direct contact with that high radiation and heat from the fire, so that's all been building up in his gear. So now he's moved into that likely cooler room, so now he's the hottest thing in that room, so he's going to be white again. So yeah, you really have to think about that when you're talking about interpretation. And again, looking for the shape sometimes is more so the key thing to key in on. For example, a firefighter's cylinder. We've all seen cylinders get nice and cold when you've been breathing on it for a while. So if that's all you see is just a glimpse of something really cold in a hot fire, well, that should trigger you right away that, hey, that's something I need to investigate. Why would there be something cold in this room? So just a couple little tips there that are good to pass on to your guys. So in this next video clip, we actually see that. So as the camera pans along, it just looks like some rubble and skids and that type of thing. But now when you get far enough along, you can see what sticks out, what grabs your attention first is the black cylinder, so a cold cylinder. And then once you see that, your eyes right away key in. Now you see the rest of the firefighter's body there. So there's a prime example of what to watch for, just those shapes and anomalies that you're looking for in a search. So for fire attack, I mean, that's one of the most common things trained for, so I'm sure everybody's pretty comfortable with that. Obviously, using the TIC is going to get you to the seat of the fire more safely and efficiently than not. Just a little tip though to throw in there, as you're making your way through the building, try to keep an eye. You should always be keeping an eye above you, but something to watch for is the direction of the heat across the ceiling. Obviously, we all know hot gases only travel in one direction. They go from the hottest area to a cooler area. And yes, that superheated gas that we saw in that other video, you're only seeing it for that very short little bit, right, immediately at the fire. But still, those hot gases are traveling across the ceiling, and they still can be tracked. So anytime you've got anything along the ceiling, any irregularity, so a bump or a drop in the ceiling, or a light fixture, a smoke alarm, anything like that that the hot gases can impinge on and impede their travel, they're going to heat up that leading edge of whatever they're running into. So when you look up at any kind of little obstruction on the ceiling, even just a crack in a concrete ceiling, that'll be enough to give you an indication of which way the heat's going. So that can really help you to direct yourself towards the fire, especially in a larger, more complex building. Something else to consider too, just in training, typically the nozzleman's not the guy that's going to be carrying the camera. He's got enough in his hands, but it's good coaching for whoever's on that camera to when you get to the fire, or especially if you're just doing some knocking down of hot spots and that type of thing, is to team up the nozzleman with the camera guy, so you can get right in front of them, show the nozzleman where the water needs to be applied. So you're just going to be way more efficient with your water and prevent over application and over damaging due to water damage. As far as overhaul, probably the most commonly used, the most common scenario that cameras are used right from when they first came out. That's pretty much what they were used for exclusively for years, when we had the great big heavy ones. So everybody's probably pretty familiar with working overhaul with a camera, minimizing water damage and that type of thing, checking for extension in walls and attics. A little training tip though, just to throw in there, when you're doing training, a lot of times we're just doing search training or we're doing fire attack training. A little tip for overhaul though, number one, anytime that you're doing some live fire, it's easy to get to the end of your live fire training day and everybody's wiped and it's just like, yeah, let's mop up and get out of here. But during that mop up, that's a perfect opportunity to do some overhaul training. So while you're knocking down the fire, instruct the guys not to just flood it right off the bat. Try to just get it knocked down and maybe even throw some stuff on top of it again or whatever, just to get in there and see what just minor hot spots look like. And you can find every little ember that's still hot, hiding in the corner of the room or something like that. Another tip, when you're not doing a live fire day or you don't have access to that, you can still do some training as far as just jumbling some stuff around. And using some low heat appliances. So for example, like a heating pad, or you can get the little cup warmers for your desk, anything that's going to give off heat but not catch fire to anything. And you can hide them in between walls behind some drywall, let it sit there for a while. It's going to take a while for the heat to get through. Throw some skids or anything, debris around, put a heating pad under it so that heat's going to work its way through. So that'll help give the guys something to key in on and look for with their thermal imager when they're doing that kind of training. MVC, not a real common use for thermal imagers, but I think everybody's probably heard of cases where it does come in handy. It's just a matter of a lot of times thinking about it. So if you've got a rollover down in a 400 highway ditch where there's some speed involved and big open country, and you may have some long grass, that type of thing, great idea to grab the camera, do a 360 to see if you've got anybody that's been ejected, or even you get some people call walkers. You get somebody that's disoriented and just wandering away from the scene, and you want to be able to catch them and find them before they get too far. And then something we've all done before, checking for bum prints in the car. So if somebody was ejected, maybe you don't see them readily just from doing your 360, but you take a look in the car, you got a driver there, and then you've got a passenger seat with a clear heat signature in it that gives you the indication there is a good chance somebody else was in there and is not in viewable distance right now, so you need to go and look for them. So yeah, this video clip is just really simple. Everybody's done it, but good idea to know. Good little tip for you if you want to kind of get an idea of how well that works and how well your camera works to do that. You come back from a run and just go out a few minutes later and with the camera and see what the seats look like in the truck, and go back a few times, see how long that imprint stays there, because again, it's gonna depend on a lot of things on the day of when you're searching that ditch. So it depends on how hot the car was inside to get some difference in temperature from the seat to the where you were sitting to the areas that weren't, how cold it is outside. Wind blowing in through open windows is going to greatly decrease how long that imprint stays there, but still can be of great value in some cases. So for this final section before we switch to live Q&A, actually if you haven't had a chance to put in any questions yet and you are wanting to, this would be a good time to do it. Just remember to enter them in the chat feature on your screen. Yeah, for this last section, I just wanted to run through just a few more safety and tactical tips and training tips for working structure fires, and then a few more suggestions, for training. Just some things that normally I try to fit in and spend a little more time on. We didn't have time in this length of session, but I just wanted to hit you with a few more quick pointers as we wrap up. So yeah, I mean, normal training, we're always telling guys to keep an eye out and ear out and everything, watch for changing conditions. I think it's extra important when you've got a TIC in your hand, because now that you've got a keen sense of vision back, sometimes that can dull some of your other senses. So maybe you're not paying attention as much to the sounds going on, or you're forging forward because you can move quicker. So just keeping a watch on changing conditions, keep an eye behind you, see what's going on from where you've been, that type of thing. Depending on the crew, depending on the people, sometimes you need to coach people to slow down a bit. You don't want to outrun your crew, so if you're on the camera and you can move fast, you don't want to get too far ahead of your crew, for one thing, and then also you don't want to miss anything. So because you can see and you can blast down that hallway faster than you normally would have, if you didn't have the camera, you might miss something. You might not be paying attention to any doors or conditions or anything like that that's happening. You just want to, sometimes it actually speeds you up if you slow down a little bit. For example, entering each room, instead of just charging in because you can see where you're going, it's worth taking a stop just for a second, doing a full scan back and forth. So scan the ceiling, scan the midpoint of the room, and then scan the floor. So that'll give you a full picture of everything that's going on in that room. And like I say, from the door, you're getting the widest angle, so you're going to get the most comparative view of what's going on in that room versus getting a really narrow view. It's hard to get a feel for what's going on when you're just looking at one little section of the room. You don't want to go too slow either. I've seen that happen. Guys get so fixated on the camera and they're over-analyzing everything they're looking at. I've actually seen in training exercises guys going up the stairs and they're actually looking down at each step that they're putting their foot on. So obviously you scan the stairs, you can see that they're normal stairs, there's no compromise in them. You put the camera down and you go up the stairs. You don't need the camera to see where you're going once you know what's ahead of you. And that's the same just anywhere in the room. Pretty standard practice. Take a look at where you need to go. You can see that it's clear, drop the camera and go. You're going to be quicker than when you're focused on looking through it. And that's going to help with that point I made earlier about keeping an aware of your surroundings, because you're not looking through the camera at every moment. Some other pointers. Watch for heat behind closed doors. Again, that comparative view. So if you're going down a hallway, you're on a fire attack, you're searching for the fire, and you're looking at multiple doors. If you're back from it, you have a better idea of comparison. If you got a hot door versus a cold door. If it's really hot, I mean, be really careful opening it. Obviously, you've got pretty rare, but you've got there is potential for backdraft happening by just popping a door and not paying attention when you could have noticed that there was a lot of heat built up behind that door. Keeping an eye on the ceiling is critical. So everywhere you're going, everything you're doing, even if you're not entering a new room, just keep looking at the ceiling, keep looking back behind you at the ceiling. Just watching for, again, those changing conditions, watching for rollover, smoke banking down as it's getting lower. Again, that's critical to keep an eye, not necessarily just with your camera. You might be looking up and it doesn't look so bad, but you pull your camera away and that's when you notice there's a lot more smoke there because you were seeing right through it with your camera. So keep an eye on those kind of changing conditions. That brings it to, I've had a couple of times now in my career where I've had guys bring up the fact that they were in conditions where they couldn't clearly see the screen, the actual display of the camera when they were looking at it. They were down near the floor and the smoke was so thick that they couldn't see the screen. That's not something that you need to, worry about, can I turn the screen brightness up? It's quite a bright screen to start with, so if you've got enough heavy smoke between your face and that screen that you're having a hard time seeing it, that should be a big warning sign for you that you've got some really bad conditions happening really quick. I kind of mentioned it as you're going through any room. It's easy to charge forward, but try to be cognizant and be making a point of pointing out any egress points, windows, doors, everything that you're seeing. Call them out to your guys as you see them. Pretty standard stuff. Watch for holes and heat coming from below. Always important, stick to your traditional search SOPs. Staying anchored to a wall, at least within a stepping distance. Staying with your left hand or right hand search, so that in the off chance that something happens with your camera and the battery dies or something happens or you lose it or something like that, you can still find your way back out and you know where you're at. And then just the last little bit here, just a few more, we kind of peppered a few in as we went, but a few more training tidbits and suggestions, I guess. I always like to try to get fire departments to schedule a full-blown dedicated TIC training session at least once a year for everybody. Just as a refresher, you're going to catch all the recruits that way that maybe didn't get it, in their basic recruit class, but you need to reinforce this stuff. And then barring that, or more so on top of that, just incorporate TIC training into every scenario and every evolution possible that you're doing. So, when you're doing a RIT scenario, yes, you still have to train, without the TIC as well, because you want to make sure that the guys have that basic instinct of being able to navigate without a TIC in case they don't have it. But definitely you want to incorporate it as well and get them used to it, because the more you use it, the more comfortable you're going to get, and the more familiar you're going to get with those interpretation issues. On top of that, training, if you can possibly train with live fire. I know everybody doesn't have a burn tower or a flashover can at their disposal all the time. Anytime you do have it, though, make sure you've got your camera with you when you go to do that session. But even when you don't, if you're doing some other training, just try to get any kind of live fire. So even a small barrel fire, a campfire type of thing, a big bonfire, or whatever you can do, just to get the guys seeing what a Class A fire looks like on the screen. And don't just stare at the fire. Do some different things. Look at it from just different angles, from just a little bit of it. Knock a little bit of the fire out, just so you have some ambers to look at. Simulating what you'd see in an overhaul situation, that type of thing. And that goes for as well if you do have live fire training props, but that are propane fired. It's better. It still works, but it doesn't replace what a typical Class A fire looks like when you've got an actual seat of coals to the fire as well, instead of just flames coming out of an appliance. So even though you've got that propane prop, try to do a little bit of Class A, like I said, even if it's just a bonfire or something like that, to get the guys used to that visual. And then lastly, I mentioned it before, but really important to understand your specific camera. So get in touch with your manufacturer's rep or your distributor rep. Pull the manual out. Everybody should have read that manual. It's important, and understand all the functionality of your specific camera. Like I said, when those colors change and what the icons mean and that type of thing. And then even more so, any features that you have on there, optional features. Like I said, if you've got some neat features like color palettes or adjustable color palettes especially, that can really throw off your interpretation, the guys really need to totally understand that stuff, or I always suggest until they do, that stuff should be shut off, and usually you can turn those features off if you're not getting the training on them. So anyway, that's kind of it for our presentation. I hope your time was well spent, and that everybody picked something up at least that you can add to your training program. And we're now going to switch to the live question and answer period.